It all started with one mistake. She thought she had found a way to bring passion back into her life, but instead, she opened the door to a living hell. A twisted revenge and the perfect illusion of family harmony, her husband turned out to be far from the man she believed him to be. What lies behind the mask of respectability? And what is it like to live knowing the truth will remain hidden forever? This story will challenge your notions of trust, love, and revenge. My dear friend, be sure to subscribe to my channel if this is your first time here, and give your royal like to this video. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 7, its sonorous notes resonating through the mansion's quiet expanse. Kimberly stood at her vanity, methodically applying mascara with practiced precision, her green eyes fixed on her reflection, betraying a flicker of unease behind the confident exterior. At 36, she exuded a timeless allure. Her meticulously styled blonde waves framed a face that could still command attention, while the sleek black dress she wore hinted at both elegance and effort. That morning she hadn't crossed paths with Jonathan, not that she had tried. Their lives had become parallel tracks, rarely intersecting, a dynamic she had deliberately nurtured. His absence, rather than unsettling her, offered a strange relief, like loosening a constricting rope. The gentle hum of her phone on the dresser pulled her from her thoughts. Zachary's name glowed on the screen, and a surge of anticipation quickened her pulse. Their exchanges had become a secret ritual, a quiet game of forbidden connection. His message was brief. "Miss you. Dinner tonight?" A faint smile touched her lips as she typed back. "Jonathan's tied up with work. 7 okay?" She paused before adding, "Wear that blue shirt I love." His response came swiftly. "For you, always." A thrill coursed through her as she set the phone down. Zachary ignited a spark in her, a feeling of vitality her marriage had long since extinguished. Returning to her mirror, she focused on perfecting every detail she knew he'd notice. Downstairs, she moved through the motions of a routine, making coffee she had no intention of drinking, leaving dishes in the sink to sustain the illusion of normalcy. Jonathan's coffee mug lay drying by the sink, a quiet reminder of the growing distance between them. When was the last time they'd shared a morning together? The memory eluded her, and its absence stirred no regret. Another vibration broke her reverie. This time, it was Jonathan. "Hope your day's going well. Love you." The words felt empty, devoid of warmth. Without replying, she slipped her phone into her bag and headed for the garage. At work, the day dragged on like a monotonous march. Meetings blurred into one another, and each phone call grated on her patience. By 5 p.m., the anticipation she'd been suppressing bubbled to the surface. She gathered her things, offering her assistant a polite nod as she passed. "Heading out, Mrs. Henderson?" Claire chirped. "Yes, dinner meeting," Kimberly replied smoothly. "Be sure the Thompson files are finalized by morning." "Already done," Claire said with a bright smile. "Have a great evening." The drive to Zachary's apartment was as familiar as the back of her hand. Parking discreetly, she approached his door, her heart racing. When he opened it, wearing the blue shirt she'd requested, her breath caught. The faint scent of his cologne enveloped her, pulling her closer. "You're early," he murmured, his lips grazing her neck as his hands sought the zipper of her dress. "I couldn't wait," she whispered, threading her fingers through his hair as he kissed the curve of her jaw. Their passions surged, leaving a trail of discarded clothing across the floor. In his arms, Kimberly felt vibrant, a stark contrast to the dullness of her marriage. Later, as they lay entwined in the soft cocoon of his sheets, she traced patterns on his chest while he toyed lazily with her hair. These quiet moments, she realized, carried as much weight as their fiery intimacy. "You should leave him," Zachary said abruptly, his tone steady yet resolute. Her hand froze mid-stroke. "It's complicated," she replied, sitting up and clutching the sheet around her. "There's the house, the money, 15 years of history." "None of that matters," he interrupted, frustration creeping into his voice. "You don't love him, not anymore." "You can't know that," she countered defensively. His bitter laugh cut through the tension. "Can't I? You're here, Kimberly. Your marriage is a charade, and we both know it." Her phone buzzed, slicing through the moment. Jonathan's name appeared on the screen. "Heading home early. Let's do dinner. Your choice." "Damn it," she muttered, scrambling to gather her clothes. "He's on his way." Zachary leaned against the doorway, his gaze a mix of irritation and resignation. "Off you go," he said dryly. "Back to the perfect wife routine." "Not everyone can live without consequences," she snapped, zipping her dress. He stepped forward, his demeanor softening as he helped her with the zipper. "One day you'll have to choose," he said quietly, "between the life you're pretending to want and the one you actually need." His words lingered as she drove home, the city's lights streaking past her like threads of gold and white. Relief washed over her when she pulled into the driveway, finding it empty. Inside, the silence of the house pressed down on her. A new message awaited. "Traffic's bad. Home in 30. She turned on the lights, creating the facade of an evening spent alone, and hurried upstairs. The hot spray of the shower erased the physical traces of her afternoon, but did nothing to dispel the weight of Zachary's words. Reaching for the light switch in her bedroom, she froze at a faint noise, the soft creak of the leather chair by the window. Her hand faltered mid-air as her eyes adjusted to the dim light. Jonathan's silhouette emerged from the shadows, seated motionless, his gaze fixed on her in silent intensity. Jonathan remained motionless, his gaze locked onto her with an intensity that unsettled her in ways she couldn't explain. The weight of his stare pressed against her, and when she finally spoke, her voice cracked, betraying her unease. It was thin, shaky, and almost unrecognizable even to herself. "Jonathan," she said hesitantly, forcing the words out, "you startled me. Why are you sitting here in the dark?" Her hand inched toward the light switch, seeking some comfort in illumination. "Don't!" His single-word command, quiet yet resolute, froze her mid-motion. That single syllable carried a chill that seeped into her skin, spreading like ice through her veins. Her arm fell back to her side, and she turned to face him, her worry mounting. "What's going on?" she pressed, trying to sound firmer, though the quaver in her tone betrayed her. "I thought you were stuck in traffic." "Did you?" he replied evenly, his voice disturbingly calm. Reaching out, he turned on the small lamp beside him, flooding the room with a muted glow. The light illuminated his face, composed yet devoid of the warmth she had once known so well. His eyes, cold and calculating, settled on her neck. Her stomach twisted as she recalled Zachary's mark. "How long?" he asked, his words sharp and measured, like a scalpel poised to cut. Her mind scrambled, desperate for an excuse, a lie that might smooth the jagged edges of this moment. But his relentless stare told her that dishonesty would only make things worse. "How long?" he repeated, his tone slicing through her faltering defenses. "Jonathan, I can explain," she began, her voice pleading. "I saw you," he interrupted, his words as precise and unyielding as a blade. "Today, with him, in his bed." His gaze held steady, his expression betraying no hint of wavering. "I'll ask you one last time. How long have you been with Zachary?" The room spun, her world crumbling as his revelation landed like a blow. He had followed her. He had seen everything. 6 months, she admitted at last, the words barely audible, dragged from her by the unbearable pressure of his silence. Jonathan's head tilted slightly, as though her confession was simply a formality, confirming something he already knew. Rising to his feet, he straightened his clothes with an unnerving composure. His movements were slow, deliberate. "Where are you going?" she asked, panic seeping into her voice. She had braced herself for rage, accusations, even tears, anything but this eerie detachment. He paused at the doorway, his back to her. "Out," he said flatly, his tone devoid of feeling. "I need air." "Jonathan, please!" she cried, her voice cracking. "We need to talk. I never meant—" He turned his head, and the look in his eyes stopped her cold. For an instant, his face twisted with something dark and unreadable before his expression smoothed back into its unsettling neutrality. "There's nothing to talk about, Kimberly," he said, her name cutting through the air like a weapon. "You made your choice. Now we both have to live with it." The door closed behind him with a finality that left her rooted to the spot. Her legs buckled, and she collapsed onto the bed, too shaken to move. This wasn't how she had envisioned the confrontation. She had prepared for anger, for pain, not for this unnerving calm. It felt wrong. It felt dangerous. In the days that followed, an uneasy routine developed. Jonathan moved into the guest room, his presence in the house reduced to faint echoes. His belongings began disappearing from their shared spaces, as if he were meticulously erasing himself from her life. Though they lived under the same roof, they orbited each other like distant planets, careful never to collide. When their paths crossed, his demeanor remained distant, his words polite but hollow. The signs of his existence grew faint. A single mug left in the sink, the sound of water running in the bathroom, the creak of footsteps late at night. Kimberly told herself this was better than confrontation. Jonathan's silence confirmed what she had long believed, that he lacked the resolve to fight for anything, even their marriage. Over time, her guilt faded, replaced by the passion she found in Zachary and the apathy she attributed to Jonathan. Life continued. She worked, stole moments with Zachary, and ignored the chasm widening between her and her husband. When she caught Jonathan watching her with that disquieting expression, she dismissed it. When she woke at night to find him standing in the hallway, gazing into the dark, she chalked it up to his way of coping. Then came the morning that shattered everything. A sharp knock on her office door interrupted her thoughts. Before she could respond, 2 men entered. One was older, his graying hair lending him an air of authority, while the other was younger, his sharp eyes scanning the room with precision. "Mrs. Henderson," the older man began, his voice steady but weighty. "I'm Detective Samuel Miller, and this is Officer Julian Morris. We need to ask you a few questions." A cold dread settled over her. "What is this about?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to steady it. Detective Miller opened a notebook. "When was the last time you saw Zachary Chun?" The question struck her like a physical blow. "What?" she managed, her thoughts scattering like leaves in a storm. "Zachary Chun," Officer Morris repeated, his tone deliberate. "We understand you know him." "Yes," she stammered, her hands shaking as she clasped them tightly. "We're friends. I saw him 3 days ago. Why?" The detectives exchanged a glance that sent a fresh wave of dread through her. "Mr. Chun was found this morning," Miller said carefully, his voice devoid of emotion. "In a cabin outside the city." Her vision swam. "Found?" she echoed faintly, her mind refusing to process the implication. "His body," Miller clarified, each word deliberate. "He was murdered, brutally. The cabin where he was found belongs to your husband's family." Her thoughts spiraled. The family cabin, the one Jonathan had taken her to in their early years, the one he sometimes visited alone. "That's not possible," she whispered. But even as she spoke, fragments of memory began to resurface. Jonathan's eerie composure, his late-night absences, the unsettling gleam in his eyes. "We need you to come with us," Officer Morris said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "to identify the body and answer some questions." The drive to the cabin blurred into a haze of trees and mounting dread. Her thoughts swung wildly between disbelief and the terrifying possibility that she didn't know the man she had married. Zachary couldn't be gone, and Jonathan couldn't have done this. Could he? Initially, it felt like an unbearable truth to confront. Standing motionless in the cabin's bedroom, her gaze fixated on the crimson-stained sheets and the numbered evidence markers scattered haphazardly. The gravity of the situation pressed against her chest like an unrelenting wave. The officers' voices, laden with technical terms, swirled around her but barely penetrated her consciousness. Her attention was riveted on the savagery that permeated the scene, a raw, violent fury that seemed to have seeped into every corner of the room. She could never have fathomed such malevolence hiding behind Jonathan's quiet, introverted demeanor. "Mrs. Henderson?" The voice of Detective Miller sliced through her daze, sharp and unyielding. "Are you sure you want to see the body?" Her breath hitched, but after a moment of hesitation, she managed a faint nod. Without a word, The officers guided her to the adjacent room, where a shrouded figure lay motionless. When the covering was drawn back with clinical precision, her legs nearly gave way beneath her. Zachary's face, contorted and almost unrecognizable, was a horrifying mask of agony. She turned away abruptly, swallowing the bile that threatened to rise. "Take your time," Officer Morris murmured gently, his voice tinged with compassion. "We understand this is a lot to process." Summoning every ounce of resolve, Kimberly met the detective's eyes. Her voice wavered as she asked, "Do you believe my husband did this?" "We're considering all possibilities," Miller replied cautiously, "but we'll need to know where you were 3 nights ago." The question hit her like a physical blow. "You think I—" Her words faltered, too appalled to finish the sentence. Miller's expression remained impassive. "Your fingerprints are all over the cabin," he stated, pulling out his phone. "We've also recovered messages exchanged between you and the victim, and there's a witness who claims to have seen your car in the area that night." Her mind reeled. Messages? Her car? The accusations were incomprehensible. She had not been anywhere near the cabin. Then, like a puzzle piece snapping into place, an unsettling realization dawned on her. Jonathan. He had access to her phone while she slept, knew every password without needing to ask. It was entirely possible he had sent the incriminating texts and tampered with her belongings. She revisited his reaction upon learning about the affair. At the time, his calm demeanor had seemed unnervingly composed. Now, as she recalled Zachary's brutalized body, a sickening clarity emerged. Jonathan's restraint had masked a deliberate, calculated act of revenge. "Mrs. Henderson," Officer Morris said, his tone more formal now, "we need you to accompany us to the station." As they led her outside, her eyes landed on Jonathan, who was conversing with an officer by the driveway. His posture was relaxed, his voice steady, exuding an air of helpful concern. Yet, as their gazes met briefly, she caught a fleeting glimpse of something darker, a flash of satisfaction, cold and deliberate. Before she could fully process it, he turned away, leaving her to suffocate under the crushing weight of her realization. The nightmare she was living had been orchestrated by the man she had trusted above all others. The interrogation room was devoid of comfort, its stark white walls illuminated by harsh fluorescent lighting. Kimberly sat in a rigid metal chair, her once elegant dress now crumpled and marred by 2 days of wear. Detective Miller methodically spread out a series of photographs on the table before her. Each image chronicled the gruesome aftermath: blood-stained walls, upended furniture, and the cabin's transformation into a scene of horror. "Let's begin at the start, Mrs. Henderson," Miller began, his tone teetering between professionalism and a feigned sympathy. "How did you meet Mr. Chun?" Her hands trembled as she answered. "At a real estate seminar in March. He worked for a management firm." "When did your relationship become personal?" Officer Morris interjected, his pen poised above his notepad. "I don't see how that matters," she replied faintly. "It's entirely relevant," Miller countered, sliding a photograph closer. It depicted Zachary's lifeless body, twisted unnaturally on the cabin floor. "You were involved with him. When did it begin?" Kimberly's eyes lingered on the image, her stomach churning. "May," she confessed. "It started in May." "And your husband?" Miller pressed. "When did he find out about the affair?" "Last month," she answered, her voice trembling. "He came home early and caught us." "How did he react?" Morris asked, his pen scratching across the paper. "He didn't," she said, confusion flickering across her face. "He just walked away without saying a word." The detectives exchanged a meaningful look. "That's unusual," Miller remarked. "Most people would react strongly in such a situation." "Jonathan isn't like most people," she blurted, the words spilling out before she could stop herself. "What can you tell us about the cabin?" Miller asked, spreading out exterior shots of the picturesque retreat that sharply contrasted the carnage inside. "When were you last there?" "Last summer," she answered quickly before realizing her misstep. "Last summer?" Miller prompted, raising an eyebrow. "With Jonathan," she clarified, her voice faltering. Miller's thin smile betrayed no warmth. "That's curious," he said. "Your car was spotted near the cabin 3 nights ago." "That's impossible!" she exclaimed. "I was at home!" "Can anyone confirm that?" Miller asked. Her lips parted, but no words came. Jonathan had been attending a charity gala that night. She had been alone. "Your fingerprints were found on the fireplace poker," Miller continued, holding up another photo. The brass weapon was stained with what appeared to be blood. "The murder weapon. How do you explain that?" "I've handled it before," she stammered. "When we stayed at the cabin, but I didn't—" "There's more," Morris added. "Blood matching Mr. Chun's was discovered in the trunk of your car." The room spun. "I want a lawyer," she whispered. "That's your right," Miller said, collecting the photos. "But keep in mind, the evidence against you is overwhelming. If there's another explanation, now is the time to share it." The holding cell was a claustrophobic cage of concrete and steel, barely large enough for her to pace. Kimberly spent the first night counting the steps over and over, desperate to block out the horrific images of Zachary's mutilated form. The thin mattress beneath her crackled with each restless movement, its rough surface offering no solace. A steel toilet stood behind a low partition, its presence only reinforcing her sense of humiliation. When sleep finally came, it was fragmented, plagued by vivid nightmares of blood, betrayal, and Jonathan's cold, calculating gaze. Each night, the same haunting vision unfolds in her dreams. Jonathan steps forward from the shadows, his expression calm yet chillingly detached. It's the same unsettling look he wore the night he uncovered her infidelity. As dawn filters through the barred windows, her court-appointed lawyer enters, radiating an uneasy blend of inexperience and enthusiasm. Marcus Harrison, fresh from law school, seems out of place as he fumbles with a stack of papers in the stark, sterile visitation room. "The case against you is compelling," he begins, nervously adjusting his glasses. His hands tremble slightly as he shifts the documents in front of him. "Forensic evidence strongly ties you to the crime scene." Kimberly leans forward, her voice urgent and cracking under the strain. "I didn't kill him. This is a setup." Harrison taps his pen on the table, his face a mix of skepticism and discomfort. "Are you suggesting your husband orchestrated this?" Her voice lowers, heavy with dread. "Jonathan isn't the man everyone believes him to be. When he found out about Zachary and me, his reaction wasn't normal." Harrison frowns, flipping through his notes. Witnesses described him as devastated but composed. His colleagues mentioned he threw himself into work and even started therapy. Kimberly shakes her head, her fingers raking through her unkempt hair. "That was all for show. Jonathan is methodical. He plans everything meticulously." Harrison's gaze flickers with a blend of doubt and sympathy. "Mrs. Henderson?" "Kimberly," she cuts in sharply. "Kimberly," he corrects, sighing. "Your husband's alibi is airtight. Over 200 people saw him at the Anderson Foundation charity gala that night. There are photos, videos, and countless sworn statements verifying his presence." Kimberly's laughter is bitter, tinged with desperation. "Of course there are. Jonathan leaves no loose ends." Fragmented memories flood her mind. Details she had dismissed as quirks now seemed ominous. His obsessive note-taking, his habit of recording conversations word for word, and his uncanny ability to recall even the smallest details from years past. It was as though he'd been cataloging her life. "Tell me about your relationship," Harrison says, readying his notepad for her response. Kimberly's eyes drop to the wedding ring still clinging to her finger. "We met in college. He was different, intense, observant. He noticed everything. I used to tease him, saying his mind worked like a computer." "When did things change?" Harrison probes gently. Her voice falters. "They didn't. I changed. I started feeling trapped. Jonathan was so predictable, so meticulous. Then he found me with Zachary." Her eyes meet Harrison's, filled with a mix of fear and disbelief. "He didn't yell or cry, he just stood there watching. Then he turned and left. Who does that? Who finds their spouse cheating and simply walks away?" "Maybe he was in shock," Harrison suggests. Kimberly shakes her head firmly. "No, Jonathan doesn't act without a plan. That wasn't shock. It was something else." Harrison's pen scratches across the paper. The prosecution's case hinges on your affair as motive. They'll argue that you killed Zachary in a moment of rage when he tried to end things. Kimberly's voice rises, almost pleading. That's a lie. Zachary never wanted to leave. He wanted us to escape from Jonathan and start fresh. Harrison presses her. Is there evidence of these plans? Any messages or witnesses? Her throat tightens, the reality of her predicament sinking in. No. We were careful. No records, no witnesses, even our messages. Jonathan could have altered them. Days blur into an endless cycle of strategy meetings and sleepless nights. Each new piece of evidence Harrison uncovers feels like another blow, tightening the noose of the prosecution's carefully constructed case. Their arguments mirror Jonathan's precision, impeccable, relentless. 2 weeks into her confinement, Jonathan visits her. His tailored suit and composed demeanor radiate control. As he steps into the visitation room, his voice is calm, almost tender. Kimberly. She recoils, folding her arms defensively. Don't. He sits across from her, every movement deliberate. I'm still your husband. Despite what? She snaps. Catching me with Zachary? Or framing me for his murder? For a moment his expression shifts, a fleeting shadow crossing his face, but his tone remains steady. You're under a lot of pressure. It's natural to look for someone to blame. Kimberly leans closer, her voice trembling with fury. The blood in my car, the fake messages, witnesses who swear they saw my car at the cabin. You orchestrated all of it, from the moment you found us. Jonathan's posture changes subtly. He straightens, his head tilting as though evaluating her. That's a serious accusation, he says coolly, especially from someone in your position. Her anger boils over. Why? If you wanted revenge, why not just divorce me? A faint, humorless smile plays at his lips. Divorce? That would have been too easy. You'd have taken half of everything we built. This way, you're left with nothing. A guard signals the end of their visit. Jonathan rises, smoothing his jacket with calculated precision. Stay strong, Kimberly. Things have a way of sorting themselves out. The preliminary hearing arrives in a whirlwind. Kimberly sits beside Harrison, her clothes a subtle reminder of Jonathan's control. He had sent them. The prosecutor delivers an unrelenting narrative, piecing together a devastating case. The evidence will show, the prosecutor declares, that Mrs. Henderson engaged in a prolonged affair with Zachary Chun. When he tried to end it, she lured him to a secluded cabin and killed him in a fit of rage. Jonathan's testimony as a character witness is flawless. His voice, steady and filled with convincing grief, paints him as the picture of a wronged yet noble husband. Kimberly watches in silence, her stomach twisting as she stares at the man she had once trusted, now her most formidable adversary. He recounts the narrative of their shared life, the years of companionship, the moment he discovered her infidelity, and the fruitless attempts to mend what had been broken. His voice trembles at precisely the right moments, his sorrow sounding heartbreakingly authentic. It's my fault, he confesses, his gaze fixed on the floor, addressing both everyone and no one in the courtroom. If I'd been a better husband, maybe she wouldn't have looked elsewhere. I wanted to forgive her, to salvage what we had, he continues, his words fading into silence, a deliberate pause that speaks louder than anything he said. Across the room, Kimberly studies him from the defense table. For the first time, she notices the skill in his performance, the picture of a loyal husband, wounded yet resilient. He embodies the image of a devoted partner, bearing humiliation in the name of love. As the trial unfolds, the mounting evidence against her paints a damning picture. Her fingerprints on the murder weapon, blood traces in her vehicle, witnesses placing her at the cabin on that critical night. Harrison, her defense attorney, fights valiantly, but the prosecution's meticulous case leaves little room for doubt. Even Kimberly's past becomes a weapon. Receipts reveal purchases of lingerie she never wore for Jonathan. Hotel stays booked under aliases connect her to Zachary. Withdrawals from the joint account add to the incriminating trail. They're piecing together a story, Harrison tells her in a tense meeting. A woman trapped in a hollow marriage, having an affair with a younger man. And when he tried to end things, she snapped, Kimberly says bitterly. That's the tale they're spinning, but it's not the truth. The truth doesn't matter to the evidence, Harrison replies, exasperated. Your fingerprints, the blood in your car, the phone records, it all fits perfectly. Jonathan is meticulous. Every detail locks into place. Running a hand through his hair, Harrison sighs. Your husband has an ironclad alibi. He was at a charity gala with hundreds of witnesses. Photos, videos, even social media posts with timestamps confirm it. That's exactly what he wants everyone to think, Kimberly mutters, her laugh hollow. Can't you see? It's too perfect. Everything lines up almost too well. The trial becomes a blur of damning testimonies and carefully arranged evidence. The prosecution constructs a gripping narrative, a jealous wife consumed by rage, murdering her lover in a moment of fury. Jonathan's testimony seals her fate. His performance is so compelling that Kimberly herself begins to doubt her innocence. When the jury returns its verdict, the words fall like a hammer blow. On the charge of first-degree murder, the foreman declares, we find the defendant guilty. A suffocating silence envelops the courtroom. Kimberly feels her legs falter, but Harrison steadies her with a firm hand. The judge pronounces her sentence, life imprisonment. As the weight of the judgment sinks in, her gaze meets Jonathan's across the room. For a fleeting second, his composed expression falters. Behind the mask of sorrow, she glimpses a glimmer of triumph. The realization hits too late. Jonathan had orchestrated every detail of her downfall. The evidence, the witnesses, the carefully constructed narrative, it had all been part of his elaborate scheme. The man she once dismissed as unremarkable had meticulously plotted her destruction. In the cold confines of her prison cell, Kimberly confronts her new reality. Her narrow bunk is a slab of ice beneath her. The ceiling, fractured with cracks, becomes her nightly contemplation. The rough fabric of her jumpsuit scratches her skin, a constant reminder of her imprisonment. Outside her cell, the rhythmic clang of metal doors and the echo of distant footsteps define her days. Somewhere nearby, the muffled sobs of another inmate punctuate the silence. The monotony is broken when Officer Martinez appears at her door. Visitor, the officer announces, her expression unreadable. Kimberly frowns. Harrison wasn't scheduled to visit, and her family had abandoned her after the trial, swayed by Jonathan's manipulative influence. Who is it? She asks, wary. Your husband, Martinez replies with a shrug. The words hit like a punch to the gut. Kimberly's hands tremble as she rises, attempting in vain to smooth the coarse fabric of her uniform. The walk to the visitation room feels endless, each step echoing louder than her racing heart. Fellow inmates watch her pass, their stares heavy with judgment. There she is, someone whispers, the cheating wife who killed her lover. In the stark visitation room, Jonathan waits, exuding calm confidence. His tailored gray suit fits perfectly, and the fluorescent lights reflect off the silver streaks in his hair. His eyes scan her disheveled form, and he smirks. You look awful, he remarks coolly. Orange really isn't your color. Kimberly drops into the chair across from him, aware of the cameras recording their interaction. What do you want, Jonathan? She asks flatly. He slides a manila envelope toward her. Think of it as a gift. Inside are divorce papers, his signature neatly inscribed. Irreconcilable differences, she reads aloud, her voice dripping with scorn. Is that your sanitized phrase for murder? Jonathan's smile sharpens, devoid of warmth. Let's avoid baseless accusations. We've seen where that gets you. Why now? She demands, holding up the papers. Why not wait for my appeal? He chuckles, low and condescending. An appeal? You actually believe you'll win? The evidence is airtight. Any judge reviewing your case will see what everyone else sees, an overwhelming mountain of proof. Proof you fabricated, she counters, her voice sharp. Allegedly, he replies smoothly, leaning closer. His tone drops to a near whisper. That's the beauty of it. No one would suspect quiet, mild-mannered Jonathan Henderson of orchestrating something so complex. The grieving husband, standing by his wife despite her betrayal and heinous crime. It's the perfect story. Kimberly stares at him, horror dawning as his facade cracks. You've reveled in this, she accuses. His expression hardens, his tone cutting. "Do you know what it was like, watching you destroy 15 years of marriage?" Kimberly's breath caught as Jonathan's voice pierced the tense air, cutting like a blade. "You thought I wouldn't notice, didn't you?" he began, his tone frigid and deliberate. "All your sneaking around with Zachary, but you underestimated me. I didn't just kill him, I executed him." Each word dripped with icy precision. "And let me be clear, Kimberly. Before he died, I made sure he understood exactly why his time had come." A sickening churn twisted in Kimberly's stomach. Her voice faltered, barely managing, What are you saying?" Jonathan leaned in, his unwavering gaze pinning her in place. "I ensured he knew his death was just the beginning, the start of your undoing. Every shred of evidence, every witness, every carefully placed clue points directly to you. This isn't about him, Kimberly. It's about you, about watching your life unravel." A cold sweat formed at her temples as a shiver ran through her body. "Tell me what you did," she pleaded, her voice cracking under the weight of desperation. "You owe me that much." Jonathan studied her for a moment, his expression calm, almost amused. Then he shrugged, the gesture as casual as his reply. "Why not? No one would believe you anyway." Leaning back in his chair with a composed ease, he began. "It started with the cabin. Simple, really. We'd spent so much time there together that your connection to it was undeniable. Your fingerprints were everywhere. All I needed to do was make it look like you'd been there recently. With Zachary." A smirk played at the corners of his mouth. "The witness? Paid in full. They did see your car that night, though. Except I was the one driving it. A wig, some makeup, and perfect timing did the trick. The text messages? Child's play. You never even bothered to change your password after I found out about you two. I spent weeks crafting fake conversations, creating a flawless digital trail. Every text, every location log, every so-called plan between you and Zachary. The police bought it all. The evidence was airtight." Kimberly's fists tightened, her nails digging into her palms as she struggled to contain the rising panic. Jonathan's voice softened, almost reverent. "Then there was the charity gala, my piece de resistance, 200 people including the mayor and half the city council. Photos, videos, social media posts, all meticulously designed to prove I was mingling with the crowd that evening. Everyone remembers the charming donor who couldn't possibly have been at the cabin." His expression darkened as he continued. "But I didn't need to stay the entire evening, just long enough to leave a lasting impression. People fill in the gaps themselves. While they assumed I was there the whole night, I slipped away to pay Zachary a visit." Kimberly's breath caught in her throat, her words failing her as the weight of his confession crushed her. "He was surprised to see me," Jonathan said, his tone devoid of emotion. "Thought I came to make peace. He even apologized. Can you believe that? Apologized, as if an apology could change anything. But I wasn't there to forgive him." She closed her eyes, trying to block out the vivid images his words painted. "Stop," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Jonathan's reply was cold. "You wanted the truth. Here it is. I orchestrated everything to destroy you. Every lie, every piece of evidence was designed to ensure you'd spend the rest of your life in a cell." "Why not just kill me?" Kimberly's voice broke, the question escaping as a whisper. For the first time, Jonathan's calm demeanor cracked, a flicker of emotion seeping into his tone. "Because death would be too kind, too quick. You don't deserve peace. I want you to live with the consequences of your choices, to watch your life crumble, to feel every agonizing second of your freedom slipping away." A guard approached the table, his voice curt. 5 minutes. Jonathan nodded in acknowledgement, then turned back to Kimberly. "Sign the papers. Let's make this official." "And if I don't?" she asked, her trembling voice barely masking her defiance. His smile was cruel, a mocking twist of his lips. "I can wait. Time is on my side. Yours, however, is not. This is your life now." "Someone will find out the truth," Kimberly whispered, clinging to a fragile shred of hope. "Someone will uncover what you've done." Adjusting his tie, Jonathan chuckled. "You mean the loyal, heartbroken husband who stood by his wife despite her betrayal? Nobody questions the grieving spouse. I've played my role perfectly." Her glare burned with defiance. "Is that all you care about? Fooling everyone?" His tone hardened. "What I care about is justice. You destroyed our marriage, flaunted your affair, and treated 15 years like they meant nothing. Now I get to watch you lose everything. Your freedom, your pride, your future." With his briefcase in hand, Jonathan rose to leave but paused at the door. "The best part?" he said, his voice venomous. "The truth is right there for anyone to see. My revenge is an open secret, but no one will believe it. No one ever saw the real me, not even you." "You won't get away with this," Kimberly said, her voice trembling. "Not forever." He turned, his gaze almost pitying. "I already have. You made me invisible, Kimberly. Now it's your turn. Just another convict, forgotten except for her crimes." With one last glance, he added, "Enjoy your new reality. The years pass very slowly in here." As the guard escorted her away, Kimberly clutched the divorce papers, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Back in her cell, she stared out through the narrow window at the sliver of sky. Once a symbol of endless possibility, it now taunted her with its unattainable freedom. As the shadows deepened and the sounds of the prison faded into silence, she sat on her bunk, haunted by the man she once believed she knew. A quiet, unassuming husband who had concealed a relentless thirst for vengeance beneath his calm exterior. The truth crushed her in waves, relentless and unyielding. Jonathan had executed his plan with ruthless precision, while she remained trapped, both by the physical bars of her cell and the intricate web of deceit he had spun. He would return to the life they had once shared, untouched and triumphant. A life she had taken for granted, a life she would never reclaim. Jonathan's vendetta was executed with a chilling elegance, a carefully orchestrated plan designed to annihilate Kimberly's very existence. It wasn't enough for him to take Zachary away from her. He had dismantled the foundation of her life, leaving nothing but ruins. Every shred of evidence, every witness, and every detail had been meticulously manipulated to ensure her entrapment was absolute. As the hours crept by in the suffocating darkness of her cell, a faint voice emerged from further down the block, singing a sorrowful blues melody that spoke of heartbreak and redemption. Kimberly lay motionless on the narrow cot, the divorce papers beside her, signed but unsubmitted, a symbol of her shattered world. The mournful tune seeped into her consciousness, stirring memories of the man she had once loved, or rather, the illusion she had trusted. Jonathan had always been a man of quiet intensity, his deliberate nature mistaken for humility. She had once seen his attention to detail as endearing, his precision as harmless quirks. Only now did she realize that those very traits had become the instruments of her downfall. His meticulousness, once admired, had transformed into the engine of a cruelty so profound it eclipsed even death in its relentlessness. He had stripped her of everything, her freedom, her dignity, her future, and he had done it so flawlessly that no one beyond these prison walls would ever believe he was behind it. To the world, Jonathan was the wronged husband, the victim of a tumultuous marriage. But behind that carefully maintained mask was a man whose calculated malice was invisible to all but Kimberly, leaving her to bear the burden of his betrayal alone. The sheer scale of his treachery pressed down on her, a suffocating weight she knew she would carry forever. In the oppressive stillness of her cell, the full extent of Jonathan's plan became excruciatingly clear. His goal had not been to simply punish her. He had aimed to create a lifetime of suffering, ensuring that each day she lived would feel like a new chapter in an unending torment. The man she had underestimated had dismantled her life with such ruthless efficiency that even the solace of mental escape seemed out of reach. The years ahead stretched endlessly before her, a bleak expanse of time to reflect on the decisions that had led her here. It wasn't just her affair that had sealed her fate, but her inability to see the predator lurking beneath Jonathan's composed exterior. She had mistaken his patience for gentleness, his restraint for fragility, failing to recognize the cold, calculated nature of his retribution until it was far too late. The faint clang of guards making their rounds echoed through the corridor, breaking her thoughts. Kimberly's eyes fell once again on the divorce papers. After a long moment of hesitation, she reached for the pen. Each stroke of her signature felt like sealing the tomb of the life she had once known. Jonathan had achieved a victory far beyond her comprehension. He hadn't simply imprisoned her physically, he had annihilated every aspect of her identity. Her reputation was in tatters, her autonomy obliterated, her very sense of self reduced to nothing under the weight of his carefully executed scheme. Outside these walls, Jonathan would continue his life unfettered, basking in the admiration of a society that saw him as the aggrieved party, a man unfairly betrayed. Meanwhile, Kimberly was left to endure the perfect trap he had set, a nightmare designed with merciless precision. His revenge was a work of art, a chilling display of quiet cruelty from a man no one could suspect of harboring such malevolence. And this was Jonathan's ultimate triumph. Not only had he destroyed her, but he had ensured that the truth of his darkness would remain forever hidden, disbelieved by all but the woman whose life he had so thoroughly ruined. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.